Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes, and the right tonight is in full freakout mode over the circumstances of the successful return of the only prisoner of war in Afghanistan, Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl. And if you're surprised by that, you have good reason to be. Because until Bowe Bergdahl was actually released by the Taliban after near 5 years in captivity, it was a fairly common view that all steps should be taken to make sure he comes home. Last year, Republican Senator James Inhofe of Oklahoma said that, quote, "It's important we make every effort to bring this captured soldier home to his family." Now, Inhofe says the president negotiated with terrorists to satisfy his, quote, obsession to close Gitmo. Republican Senator Kelly Ayotte of New Hampshire referred just last month to her, quote, ongoing efforts to urge the Department of Defense to do all it can to find Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl and bring him home safely. Now she says the prisoner swap that freed Bergdahl endangers U.S. national security interests and could encourage our enemies to capture more Americans. Then there's Republican Senator John McCain of Arizona. Here he is on CNN in February.
So if there was the possibility of some sort of exchange, that's something you would support?
I would support. Obviously, I'd have to know the details, but I would support ways of bringing him home, and if exchange was one of them, I think that would be something I think we should seriously consider.
McCain, of course, caveating you have to know the details. Well, now McCain, former prisoner of war, says he would not have made the deal to bring Bergdahl home, since the prisoners' exchange poses a great threat to the lives and well-being of American servicemen and women in the future. In the conservative media, Bowe Bergdahl is being lambasted as a deserter and a traitor. The Drudge Report today blasting the former POW as a rat with a question mark. And a Wall Street Journal columnist quoting an unidentified special forces operator suggesting Bergdahl should be killed by firing squad. Meanwhile, former Bush administration official and Romney spokesperson has taken it upon himself to help arrange media interviews for soldiers to criticize Bergdahl. The message behind much of this is quite simply that Bowe Bergdahl did not deserve to be saved. His critics are seizing on reports that he left a note in his tent saying he'd become disillusioned with the Army before walking away from his base, and emailed comments critical of the American government to his family before he was captured. So let's assume for the moment all this is true. A 23-year-old soldier walked off his base in disgust, deserted, and got captured by the Taliban. Well, does that mean he does not deserve to be brought home? I asked Rear Admiral John Kirby that last night.
When you put this uniform on, there's an understanding that if you're lost and you're taken captive, we're going to go to great lengths to get you back. I grew up in the Navy. If you fall overboard on a ship, we don't ask whether you were pushed or whether you jumped. We turn the ship around and we go get you.
In Poland today, President Obama reaffirmed the importance of that principle.
Regardless of the circumstances, whatever those circumstances may turn out to be, we still get an American soldier back if he's held in captivity. Period. Full stop. We don't condition that.
The details of what Bowe Bergdahl did or didn't do are just one side of this prisoner exchange. On the other side, and one that conservatives are criticizing as well, are the 5 men released from Guantanamo Bay in exchange for Bergdahl. Now, some of the right are using the release of those prisoners to call for the president to be impeached. In the words of Alan West, the president's unilateral negotiations with terrorists without the consent of Congress should trigger that drastic step. Let's be very clear about who these men are that were released from Guantanamo Bay and what they are accused of doing, because people are referring to them as terrorists, referring to negotiating with terrorists. These are people who are all members of the Taliban, who were fighting American military forces in Afghanistan after the American invasion of Afghanistan after the September 11th attacks. Some, if not all of these men, have done some really horrible things. But they are viewed by our government not as terrorists, unlike some other Guantanamo detainees. They are viewed as prisoners who are being held as enemy combatants under the conditions of regular war. And that is a crucial distinction. There is a long-standing tradition of prisoners of war exchanges at the cessation of hostilities. We are reaching that period now in Afghanistan. The war is ending, and under international law, prisoners of war have to go home. As John Bellinger, a State Department legal advisor in the Bush administration, wrote over the weekend, it is likely the U.S. would be required, as a matter of international law, to release the 5 men shortly after the end of 2014, when U.S. combat operations cease in Afghanistan. So, here's what happened. 5 men who were probably going to be released anyway under the the terms of international law, were released in exchange for an American prisoner of war. And everybody who is worried about the precedent of, quote, negotiating with terrorists, who is calling for the president's head over this, is ignoring a very important precedent that would have been violated had we not done this. The precedent of exchanging prisoners of war at the end of battle. That precedent is there not just for humanitarian purposes. It is there to protect American troops. Because we do not want Americans captured in battle to be held by the enemy for the rest of their lives. And everyone demagoguing about the terrorists swapped for Bergdahl must answer precisely what exactly their plan is for those prisoners. Joining me now, Mark Jacobson, Senior Advisor to the Truman National Security Project. He served in Afghanistan as advisor to General David Petraeus, General Stanley McChrystal, and Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, former Chief of Staff at the State Department during General Colin Powell's term, now Distinguished Adjunct Professor of Government and Public Policy at the College of William and Mary. And Mark, I'll begin with you. I mean, you worked on some of these issues with Petraeus and with McChrystal in the Bush administration. In Iraq, let's just take the example of Iraq, not even talk about Taliban. I mean, in Iraq, all of that was conducted under the normal laws of war. There were insurgents who did horrible things, who tried to kill American troops, who blew up Marines with IEDs, who were taken, who were released back. Am I correct?
Yeah, if you take a look back at the arguments during the early phase of the Iraq War, it was, look, there are going to be people in conflict who do bad things. Look even further back, and this is when Larry was over at the State Department. Take a look at the arguments over the Taliban and al-Qaeda. There were Nazi SS officers during the Second World War who were treated as prisoners of war, and if they were war criminals, they were tried and in many cases executed. A lot of the problem we see with detainees today is as a result of the failure to abide by international convention to deal with that threat.
And Colonel Wilkerson, I mean, this is a situation in which there is a category of men who are being held in Guantanamo who are being prosecuted by the American government for plotting to kill Americans, for plotting or committing acts of terrorism. These men are not in that category. That can't be stressed enough to my mind.
Actually dealing with these people in a very formal diplomatic maneuver aimed at getting them to release, to give up the al-Qaeda in their midst prior to our invasion of Afghanistan. We recognized their government, however heinous we might have judged it to be, and we were dealing with them. And I think it's very astute that what's happened here with Qatari help is that we selected the people who might be the best to begin some really meaningful talks about reconciliation in Afghanistan so that the new government in Afghanistan, post-Karzai, has an opportunity to bring a political solution in that country that might bring some stability.
Mark, having worked on these issues, having been in the Bush administration during that time, are you at all surprised by watching the kind of outrage machine get spun up in the last three days or so?
Well, let me just correct one thing. I was a civil servant working at the Pentagon during the Bush administration. I don't want to be associated there. But look, what bothers me is that there are some really great opportunities as a result of what's happened. One, Bowe Bergdahl is home. Two, we have shown that the Qataris can be intermediaries with the Taliban, and this is going to be crucial to driving that political settlement forward between the Afghan government and the Taliban eventually. There are certainly some risks in terms of releasing people from Guantanamo, but there are always going to be risks there.
But Mark, as soon as you say that, here's what you're going to hear. This is, and I've seen it everywhere. As soon as you say it, you want to talk to terrorists. You want to negotiate with terrorists. You want to talk to terrorists. What's wrong with you? Why do you, the blood of Americans is going to be on your hands and anyone who supports this in the future? What do you say to that?
Okay, take a look at what the British did with the IRA, what the Israelis have done with the Palestinians. If you want peace, you are going to sit across the table from people who have the blood of your friends on their hands, on both sides. But this is part of making war and going to and making the peace. Let me stress one point. The very existence of Guantanamo has actually put American troops' lives at risk simply because it's created this legal black hole that's been exploited for propaganda value and probably brought more terrorists in through recruitment than we can count.
Colonel Wilkerson, do you agree with that?
Well, I certainly do, and I must say that our blanket use of the word terrorist to describe almost anyone in the world who disagrees with our policies in the world is going to haunt us for a long time to come. I would say that the Taliban are fighting against us in Afghanistan for the most part because we're there. They're fighting us because we're on their soil, we're in their territory, and we're contesting their power. They're not terrorists. They're not people who want to bring through terrorist actions against the United States some sort of political objective to bear. They are fighting us because we're in their country and we're fighting them.
Right,
so,
and that's where I think
before,
that's where I think when we talk about, I mean, all this discussion is about has been the risk to American lives, and I think this distinction. And again, two of these men, there are allegations they were associated with Al Qaeda. They were close to Osama bin Laden when Al Qaeda was taking safe haven in Afghanistan. There's also allegations that I think two of them were engaged in war crimes, massacres of ethnic minorities in Afghanistan. Again, horrible, atrocious acts that should be tried under international law if the facts are there to pursue it. But these were not
Chris,
men.
I hate to point it out.
Please.
Let me just point out that we were very close to these same people when they were fighting the Soviets.
Yeah. Yes, and these were not men who, unlike, say, example of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who were operationally sitting there planning how to fly airplanes into buildings and slaughter American civilians in their office towers, Mark.
Well, having been in the Pentagon on 9/11, I don't want to discount the danger that the Taliban sanctuary for Al Qaeda posed. Right. And again, these are dangerous individuals. But the points you made earlier, we are trying to drive home a conclusion to the war in Afghanistan. That's going to be a political settlement. These individuals are in Qatari hands for a little while. We should be so lucky that they pick up the phone and call Mullah Omar. Right. I mean, that could have some great advantages, too. But the point is, we don't know what role these individuals might play for positive. And frankly, if they go back to the battlefield a year and a half from now, the administration's done a lot of things to mitigate the risk to U.S. troops. They're a challenge for the Afghan government. And frankly, if they're that concerned, the Afghans may even put them on trial. We're not sure yet what's going to happen.
Colonel Wilkerson, as someone who's spent a career in life in the military, what do you make of the spectacle of an American soldier being essentially tried in absentia for desertion via cable news and websites?
Well, this is no surprise to me. I've learned that both political parties, but particularly my own, and people like Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham and John McCain and others, will take advantage of almost any situation to score points against the current administration. So it's no surprise that they're doing it. It's reprehensible, but it's no surprise, and I'm a member of their party.
Do you think, I mean, it just seems to me so bizarre. I mean, here's someone who spent 5 years in the Taliban captivity. He's recovering in a military hospital and may have done something really awful and actionable under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. That can be adjudicated under the normal processes and due process he is accorded by the Uniform Code of Military Justice. The idea that we have to declare now what his nature is, just, I don't understand it, Colonel.
Well, actually, if you want to look at it from a strictly legal point of view, and by legal I mean the Uniform Code of Military Justice, the body of laws that governs our military, the only way we would ever have an investigation and determine how he left the forces in Afghanistan is to bring him home.
That's right.
We certainly would have done it while he was in the hands of the Afghans. That's
a necessary predicate. Mark Jacobson from the Truman National Security Project and Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson from the College of William & Mary. Thank you, gentlemen, both.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Coming up, the conservative media loses its mind over Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl.
6 soldiers died searching for this guy that may have gone AWOL, may have deserted.
It's a perfect example of Obama's incompetence. He dips his hand into the war randomly and says, I'm going to free this guy, I guess. He chooses a loser, a deserter, who's killed men. He's killed those boys. He killed those 6 soldiers that went to find him.
More on that next. I want to read to you a statement released by Republican Congressman Lee Terry of Nebraska on May 31st. That was the day Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl was released from Taliban captivity. Quote, "A grateful nation welcomes the news of the return of Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl. I have the pleasure of regularly speaking with our nation's active duty military and veterans. I know there's nothing more solemn than the pledge to never leave one of their own behind on the field of battle. Sergeant Bergdahl is a national hero." If you go looking for that statement on Congressman Terry's website, you will not find it, because that statement welcoming home the last American prisoner of war from Afghanistan has been removed from Congressman Terry's website. Now, I'm just spitballing here, but I'm guessing he took it down when he learned that welcome home is just not how conservatives are rolling with this news. Instead, the conservative take on Sergeant Bergdahl's return looks more like this.
I'm not sure it would be a good swap if we were trading for a Medal of Honor winner, much less trading for somebody who may well have been a deserter.
All I know is a soldier who didn't much really like this country is coming home, and 5 guys who clearly hated this country are maybe coming back.
He's no crown jewel.
Yeah, yeah.
And he was a ballerina when he was a kid.
When you listen to the people who know him, there's something fishy there.
Obviously has some sympathies and some capacity for the enemy, based if these statements are true, or is he ashamed of his country.
What information, if any, either willfully or under duress, did he provide to the enemy?
Is anyone else a little bit skeptical about the father with the beard?
He has learned to speak Pashto, the language of the Taliban, and looks like a Muslim.
At the Rose Garden, the father praised Allah.
I mean, you know, end of the case. Joining me now, Michael Tomasky, special correspondent for the Daily Beast. I have to say, I really like. I've gotten into this big fight with a bunch of people on the right recently, where over the last few days, because this whole thing has really wound me up. And I want to just the distinction between there were people in that platoon who were furious at Bergdahl. They felt like he abandoned them. They felt like they lost people pursuing him. That anger is something that I think anyone can understand. I don't have personal access to. That is distinct from a just full spectrum attempt to assassinate the character of a guy who cannot speak up in his own name because he's in a military hospital in Germany.
Yeah, and Chris, you and I both know they're assassinating his character not because they care very much about him. They're assassinating their character because it's a way to get at Barack Obama's character, right? It's a way to turn this into their story, their narrative about the kind of president that they say they believe Obama is, the Manchurian president, all that kind of nonsense. They want to get Obama on this. Right. They want to turn whatever they can that the White House has done here, perhaps an error in judgment. I mean, we can say that this was, you know, maybe it was too high price to pay to release those 5 guys, but they want to turn those potential errors of judgment into high crimes and misdemeanors, and it's laying the groundwork. The character assassinations of Bergdahl and his father are really aimed at Obama.
Yeah, I mean, if it's one thing that the actual sergeant in question, who may or may not have done the things that he is, or had done the things with the intent to desert that he is reported to have done. It's another to attack a father who's had his son in captivity for 5 years and grew a solidarity beard and has whatever beliefs he has. I mean, that just seems completely out of bounds. So you say that. But what I think is interesting, it's always amazing to watch the kind of right-wing machine gear up together. It's like there's like someone sends out like a bat signal, and then it's you know, and the bat signal's Drudge, frankly, and what happens is in this case you have Republicans who are wrong-footed because they didn't get the message early enough. So here's Joni Ernst, who's on the ballot tonight in Iowa. Andrew Kaczynski catches her tweeting, U.S. Army Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl freed after being reported missing 5 years in Afghanistan. Thoughts and prayers go out to Sergeant Bergdahl and his family. That tweet was deleted. She deleted her thoughts and prayers.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite ones, and of course she's in a race right now, and she's facing an election right now, and you know, she's favored to win, but so this probably hasn't happened soon enough to hurt her at the polls, but she might end up in a runoff, and it could hurt her there. But she and the congressman you cited before, you know, it's really interesting because they started out, well, the kid's from Idaho, you know, Mitt Romney got 80% of the vote in Idaho. Idaho's probably safe. Right. Turns out maybe not.
Yeah, I'm imagining the campaign manager, you know, reaming out the staffer on the Ernst campaign saying, you tweet, no, delete the thoughts and prayers, delete the thoughts and prayers. And this is the thing. I mean, again, you know, people keep saying, well, no one's making the argument he should have been left behind. That's ridiculous. How could that's slanderous to say that people are making that? First of all, people that in my Twitter feed are making that argument. But also, what exactly is the argument here? I mean, is the idea that, you know, you see some people saying, well, he's not a hero. Okay, fine, that's going to be adjudicated. But it's very hard not to reach the conclusion that people are pushing the idea that we should have sort of remotely adjudicated his guilt and left him.
Well, there's no sort of about it. That's exactly the argument. It's left implied in most tweets and comments, but every once in a while it's kind of sort of stated. But yes, that's clearly what they mean. We absolutely should have left the guy to die, or should have left him to whatever fate he was going to be left to, because he wasn't worth it. And as you said, you know, I know they're saying it on your Twitter feed, and they're saying it on mine too. They're saying it openly, just not prominent people yet. But rank and file conservatives are certainly saying it. and it'll bubble up. It'll bubble up.
And to me, this is also an object lesson in a big part of the reason Guantanamo is still open is because these kinds of fights. And if Guantanamo is going to close, there's going to be releases, and it's going to be demagoguing like this, just constantly. This is part of keeping that thing open, of keeping the war on terror going, which has become central to the worldview of the right. Michael Tomasky from the Daily Beast, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Chris.
All right, coming up, we've done reporting on this show about the one gun the NRA doesn't want you to have, the smart gun, and the NRA has finally responded, sort of. That's next.